Welcome to Tales by Tochi. These stories are real, unique and exceptional because they the African culture. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me, and also you will be able to enjoy and learn from these amazing stories. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Maxwell Briggs sat behind his polished mahogany desk like a king on a throne, a sly smile curling his lips as he surveyed the glass tower of Dominion Enterprises from the top floor. He wasn't just the CEO, he was the empire. His suits were custom-made, his wristwatches cost more than most people's cars, and his mere presence in a hallway caused silence and tension. To the media he was a visionary, to investors he was a genius, but to the female employees of Dominion, Maxwell was a predator. He had created a culture of silence where sexual favors were the unspoken price of job security. Everyone in the company knew the rules. If Maxwell wanted you, resistance meant relocation, or unemployment. Most women caved in under pressure, too afraid to lose their jobs, too desperate to protect their families, and Maxwell knew this. He thrived on that fear. His wealth made him feel invincible, and that illusion of power fueled his darkest impulses. He never forced them, not physically. He didn't need to. He dangled promotions, travel opportunities, or office perks in front of their tired eyes like treats before the whip. And if they dared say no, he'd ruin them quietly and efficiently. The stories were whispered in corridors and restroom stalls, of young analysts who went into his office and came out pale, of executive assistants who returned from business trips, with red eyes and designer purses. No one could speak openly, HR was under his thumb, and anyone who filed complaints mysteriously lost their job within weeks. Maxwell had perfected his method. First came the charm, subtle compliments, knowing smiles, late-night texts that blurred the lines between professional and personal. Then came the lure. A dinner invitation, a business flight, a private meeting to discuss career growth. If the woman hesitated, he reminded her of what he could offer, or take away. He used loneliness, ambition, and fear like tools in his belt, breaking them down until they saw no choice. His office was a glass cage of fear. Dominion's success was built not only on strategy but on silence, and silence was something he bought well. His staff was trapped in golden chains, fearful of losing their jobs, but equally terrified of what might happen if they spoke up. It was a system he had designed meticulously, and it had never failed him. Until Amaka walked in. Amaka didn't dress like the others, tight enough to draw his gaze, but sharp enough to command respect. She was a graduate of one of Nigeria's top business schools, recommended by the board itself for her outstanding strategic mind. When she first walked into the Monday meeting and challenged Maxwell's marketing plan with bold suggestions and fresh ideas, he was taken aback. Not by her intelligence, many women at Dominion were brilliant, but by her confidence. She didn't fawn over him. She didn't giggle or avoid eye contact. She looked him square in the eyes, criticized his outdated strategy, and offered a better one. The room fell into a stunned silence, but Maxwell laughed, a slow, intrigued chuckle that hinted at more than just approval. He had seen many women in that boardroom, but Amaka was something else entirely. And in that moment, a new game began. One that Maxwell was certain he would win, like always. What he didn't know was that Amaka wasn't just different, she was ready to fight back. Dominion Enterprises ran like a machine, smooth on the surface, humming with success, but powered by rusted gears behind closed doors. Every woman who had climbed up the ranks carried invisible scars and secrets she couldn't dare speak aloud. From receptionists to senior managers, they all had stories that followed the same haunting rhythm. A promotion, a private dinner, a night that changed everything. Maxwell Briggs operated in a system he had crafted and perfected over the years, one built on manipulation and fear. He had men on the board who owed him too much to question him, an HR department handpicked to sweep everything under the rug, and a legal team that shut down any whispers of misconduct before they ever reached daylight. Complaints were either ignored or disappeared like smoke. And the women? Most were either too scared to come forward or convinced themselves it was the price they had to pay for success. The ones who resisted were quietly pushed out, framed for underperformance, or given roles so meaningless they left on their own. There was Chinello, a bright project manager who had been offered a trip to Dubai under the pretense of attending a tech summit. She returned broken and quit 2 weeks later. There was Boma, a mother of two who had refused Maxwell twice and was demoted to desk work overnight, her promotion revoked without explanation. There was also Kemi, a brilliant intern who had risen fast through the company, only to vanish completely from the system after just 6 months. No one dared ask questions. The hallways of Dominion were lined with quiet eyes, burdened by what they'd seen but helpless to speak. Even the men at the company had learned to keep their distance, pretend not to notice and stay out of Maxwell's path. The ones who tried to do the right thing were sidelined, branded as troublemakers or emotional. Maxwell's influence was like smoke in the air, invisible but everywhere. He had friends in the media, ties in government, and even rumors of ties to law enforcement. He wasn't just rich, he was connected. And that made him dangerous. The only ones who stayed were those who had made peace with the game, or those who hoped they'd never be noticed. For years, Dominion grew on the backs of these silenced women. Their talent kept the company ahead. Their silence kept Maxwell free. But then came Amaka, and she didn't play by those rules. The first time Maxwell tried his usual tactics, she didn't flinch. She didn't smile nervously. She didn't avoid him in the hallway. Instead, she looked him square in the eyes and said something no one else had dared say, "I came here to work, not to please you." It was a line that stunned even his executive assistant, who happened to overhear the exchange. Word spread quickly, quietly, like sparks on dry grass. Some women admired her. Others feared for her. But everyone knew, Amaka was different. And in a place like Dominion, being different could either make you a star or a target. Amaka's arrival at Dominion wasn't just another recruitment, it was a statement. The board had personally endorsed her, impressed by her strategy paper on market disruption. She had worked with international firms and graduated with top honors. But more than her achievements, it was her aura, fierce, focused, and unafraid, that made her stand out. During her first team meeting, she challenged the senior brand director on a campaign design that lacked data support. People glanced at one another in the room. No one ever questioned directors like that. But Amaka did. Calm, sharp, and unapologetically professional. Maxwell watched her with interest from his seat at the end of the table, intrigued not just by her competence but by her confidence. He liked to test strong women, they were more fun to break. After the meeting, he pulled her aside with his signature charm, saying, "You've got fire." "I like fire." She thanked him and walked away. No giggle. No flirting. Just poise. Later that day, Maxwell summoned her to his private suite under the guise of a welcome conversation. The room smelled of cologne and leather, an obvious performance. He poured her a drink. She declined. He praised her presentation. She thanked him. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping into something suggestive. "You're going to go very far here, if you stay close to the right people." Amaka straightened her spine and smiled politely, then replied, "I believe talent and performance speak for themselves, sir." It was the first time Maxwell was thrown off balance. He leaned back slowly, watching her as if she were a riddle. The encounter ended with her leaving unshaken, and him unusually silent. That night he told his assistant, "She'll come around." They all do. But in his gut, he knew Amaka wouldn't be easy. And for a man like Maxwell, no wasn't just rejection, it was a challenge. Over the next few weeks, Maxwell launched a subtle campaign to break her down. He began by praising her work publicly, increasing her visibility in the company. Then came the lunch invites, the after-hours messages, and the expensive gifts sent anonymously to her desk. Each time, Amaka returned the gifts to his assistant with a simple note, "Not interested." Then he tried pressure. He hinted to her that her team might get dissolved if performance didn't rise. She saw through it and filed a formal report, knowing HR would ignore it but wanting a paper trail. He finally confronted her during a private strategy meeting, his voice low and angry. "Don't be stupid, Amaka. You think you can survive here without me?" She didn't blink. "Touch me," she said coldly, "and I'll go to the police. You might be rich, but you're not untouchable." Maxwell burst into laughter, leaning against his desk. "Sweetheart," he said with a smug grin, "money buries the law in this country. You'll be out of this building before the complaint leaves your mouth." He was wrong, and he was about to find out just how wrong. It wasn't long after that confrontation that Maxwell escalated his pursuit. One Friday evening he sent Amaka a calendar invite titled, "Leadership Growth Dinner, CEO's Table." It looked official, even included the company letterhead. But Amaka knew better. She had seen the same invite template on her colleague Anita's screen months before, just before Anita disappeared from her role and transferred to a dead-end department. Amaka declined the invite and instead responded with a formal email, copying HR and stating that her schedule was full and suggesting a team-inclusive workshop instead. The next morning she found her parking space reassigned. The day after, her internal communications were mysteriously suspended for 24 hours due to a technical error. But Amaka remained unbothered. She dealt with worse. She continued showing up, head high, voice firm, and clothes sharp but modest. That weekend, she received a call from Maxwell himself, private number, smooth voice, layered with false patience. "Amaka, I admire your independence, but you're playing a dangerous game. I can make you, or break you." She responded with silence, then said quietly, "I won't trade dignity for favors, Mr. Briggs. If that costs me this job, so be it." The line went dead. But her message was clear. The next Monday, her access card no longer worked. Security was already waiting. She was escorted out of the building like a criminal. No warning. No explanation. Just like that, her chapter at Dominion was closed, or so Maxwell thought. But what he didn't know was that Amaka's story was only just beginning. He had fired her thinking it was a final blow, but in truth, he had set her free. Across the street, in a different high-rise, Zenith Dynamics was watching. Their CEO had long suspected Maxwell's corruption but never had proof, until Amaka's quiet exit from Dominion raised eyebrows. Within days, Zenith reached out. A discreet meeting turned into an offer. Not just a job, but a leadership role, one that came with power, resources, and trust. Amaka accepted. She didn't just want to rebuild her career, she wanted to expose the rot. With a new position, a clean slate, and motivation burning in her chest, she set out to do the one thing no one had dared do before: bring Maxwell Briggs to justice. And this time she wasn't alone. Maxwell Briggs was a man obsessed. Amaka's rejection wasn't just a personal insult, it was a threat to his ego, his reputation, and his carefully maintained illusion of dominance. For the first time in years, a woman had walked away from him with her dignity intact, and worse, she had done it with a look that said, "You don't scare me." That single moment haunted him more than he admitted. His wealth had always been his weapon. He used it to silence dissent, to rewrite narratives, to turn his sins into secrets. But Amaka's refusal was like a splinter in his pride, one he couldn't pull out. She had embarrassed him. She had left him powerless. And Maxwell Briggs didn't like feeling powerless. So, he did what predators do when challenged: he escalated. Quietly, ruthlessly, and with calculated fury. He began by digging into her background. He hired private investigators to look into her past, hoping to find dirt he could use against her. Every email she had ever sent on the company server was reviewed. He leaked confidential memos to hint that she had violated corporate policy. He even tried to plant evidence in her system suggesting she had sold company secrets to Zenith, a strategic smear campaign meant to tarnish her credibility. HR began sending out cold statements to the press about a former employee currently under investigation. When reporters called Amaka for comments, she calmly redirected them to Zenith's legal department, who shut it down with fire. But Maxwell wasn't done. He reached out to social media influencers to spread rumors anonymously, calling her a gold digger who bit the hand that fed her. The stories didn't stick. People had seen too much of Amaka's brilliance to believe them. But the attacks were relentless. Maxwell was no longer trying to get her back, he was trying to destroy her before she became a bigger problem. Meanwhile, Amaka stood tall. She wasn't just surviving, she was strategizing. She collected every press release, every leaked memo, every slanderous post. With Zenith's legal team backing her, she began building a silent case, a folder filled with harassment, defamation, and abuse of power. She reached out to former female colleagues from Dominion, speaking in hushed tones over encrypted calls. Many were still afraid. Some cried as they shared what they endured: threats, manipulation, even being blacklisted from the industry for speaking out. Amaka listened to them all, documenting every word, every detail. And though she hadn't struck yet, she was preparing for war. Dominion had fired her, but in doing so they had freed her from their chains. And now, armed with truth and a burning sense of justice, Amaka was ready to fight the monster that once ruled unchecked. To understand the weight of what Amaka was fighting against, one had to see the wreckage Maxwell left in his wake. Behind every successful year at Dominion there were women, dozens of them, who had been used, discarded, and silenced. Some bore visible wounds. Others carried invisible ones that never healed. Maxwell had built his legacy by breaking women piece by piece, always with a smile, always with deniability. He didn't force them with fists, he did it with fear. A single mother desperate to feed her child. A young graduate trying to escape poverty. An intern who had never left her village before being offered a business trip. Maxwell knew how to find their weaknesses and used his power to turn need into submission. It wasn't just sex, it was psychological warfare. And once they gave in, he made sure they stayed quiet, ashamed, and dependent. There was Lara, an IT analyst who had shown immense promise. Maxwell had invited her to a private strategy retreat, just the two of them. She returned withdrawn and afraid but too scared to speak. When she stopped responding to his messages, she was demoted. He replaced her with someone who smiled more. Lara ended up quitting and leaving Lagos altogether. Then there was Ngozi, who had once been Maxwell's executive assistant. She had lasted longer than most because she followed every rule, never said no. But even that wasn't enough. When she got pregnant, he cut her off completely, replaced her without warning, sent her severance through a third party, and blocked her calls. She miscarried from stress. And no one said a word. Maxwell's world was a fortress, and inside it, every woman was a prisoner until they broke. But the worst part? Most people in Dominion knew. The men looked the other way, pretending it wasn't their business. The women who escaped early kept their heads down, grateful to have left. And those still trapped? They lived in fear, watching their backs, praying they'd never be noticed. It wasn't just Maxwell who was guilty, it was the culture that allowed him to thrive. Amaka knew this. She knew that taking him down meant exposing not just one man, but the entire ecosystem that protected him. That's why she was careful, strategic. She didn't rush to the press. She gathered her evidence. She built relationships with journalists, lawyers, and investigators. She promised the victims anonymity and protection. And slowly, the silence that once suffocated Dominion began to crack. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into voices. And Maxwell, the untouchable king, started to feel the ground shift beneath his feet. Despite all his attacks, Maxwell couldn't forget Amaka's eyes, how they never flinched, how they never feared him. And that terrified him. He had destroyed stronger women before. He had buried scandals with money and threats. But Amaka? She wasn't breaking. Even worse, she was thriving. As head of strategy at Zenith Dynamics, her name was rising in every corporate circle. She spoke at innovation forums. She led Billionaire deals. She even got profiled by a major magazine as the future of tech in Africa. Every headline made Maxwell's blood boil. In his eyes, Amaka wasn't just a woman who said no. She was a woman who dared to win after saying no. He hated her for it. But even now, a part of him still believed he could bend her. That she was just putting on a show. That she would come back to him if the pressure became unbearable. He was wrong. He reached out again, this time through mutual friends, through old board members who claimed to want peace. He sent her flowers with cryptic notes. She had them burned. He tried to bribe her with shares in Dominion. She laughed. Then he tried fear again. Anonymous emails. A fake lawsuit. Surveillance. None of it worked. Amaka knew his tactics now, and she refused to bow. Finally, in one last desperate move, Maxwell called her directly. Amaka, he said, his voice low, you think you're safe because of where you are now. But I built this industry. I own it. She didn't scream. She didn't shake. She just said, touch me again and I'll bury you in the one place your money can't reach, the law. Then she hung up. And for the first time, Maxwell didn't laugh. He knew it then, she wasn't coming back. Amaka's resistance wasn't just personal anymore, it was public. She began appearing on panels about women in the workplace, subtly referencing her experiences without names. Her calm voice masked years of fire. More women began reaching out to her, secretly at first, then openly. They trusted her. She was proof that survival was possible. She became a symbol, a mirror, and a weapon. Zenith gave her space, resources, and most importantly, protection. With every passing week, she grew stronger. Maxwell, on the other hand, began to unravel. His allies started distancing themselves. Investors whispered. Rumors of internal investigations spread. And through it all, Amaka stood tall, knowing the war was far from over. But finally, for once, the battlefield was no longer tilted in Maxwell's favor. When brute force failed, Maxwell decided to play smarter. He knew the walls were closing in, and though the public didn't yet have solid proof of his misdeeds, the rumors were no longer whispers, they were now conversations. His board was growing restless. Some investors had already pulled out. He needed to act fast. If he couldn't break Amaka's resolve, maybe he could discredit her. He devised a plan, elaborate, subtle, and cruel. Through a mutual contact pretending to be a journalist, he arranged an exclusive story on women in leadership and invited Amaka for an off-site interview. Everything was staged, the venue, the questions, even the videographer. He wanted her to slip up, say something emotional or legally risky, something he could edit and release to manipulate the narrative. But Amaka sensed it. The invitation felt too convenient, the interviewer too eager. She agreed, but brought a lawyer from Zenith disguised as her PR manager. The session went as Maxwell had hoped, until it didn't. Amaka answered every question with calm grace, never incriminating herself or anyone else, but still delivering powerful messages about toxic workplace culture, abuse of power, and the need for women to stand tall. She spoke with such clarity that even the fake interviewer was moved. And then came the trap, a question about her time at Dominion and whether any names could be mentioned. Amaka paused, smiled slightly and said, "This isn't about individuals. It's about systems that protect predators." The interviewer pushed again, but Amaka leaned forward and said, "Let this interview be the evidence if anything happens to me. If I disappear, if I'm framed, if someone tries to bury the truth, you'll know who they are." The room went silent. The interviewer knew then, he'd just been outplayed. Amaka walked out of that building stronger than ever. Maxwell was furious. His plan had failed again. But Maxwell wasn't done. Days later, Amaka's email was hacked. Internal documents from Zenith were leaked online, not harmful but enough to raise suspicion. Then her face appeared on a manipulated video, suggesting she had seduced a government official to land a contract. It trended briefly before Zenith's cyber team traced it back to Maxwell's digital trail. Legal notices were fired. Then, in a move that shook the entire corporate sector, Zenith publicly issued a statement defending Amaka, confirming ongoing legal investigations into Dominion's misconduct, and pledging full support to any former employees who wanted to come forward. The trap Maxwell set had turned into a spotlight, and he was now exposed. Journalists started digging. Government agencies started sniffing. And Amaka? She quietly compiled every attack, every message, every fabricated document. She was done playing defense. It was time for war. The final blow had actually come long before Maxwell realized it. Back when Amaka refused his advances and warned him that she would go to the police, he should have known the battle was bigger than pride. But men like Maxwell didn't listen, not until the world started listening instead. When he fired her, he did it with the arrogance of a king who believed the throne couldn't be shaken. He had security escort her out, even smirked when he watched the cameras as she walked through the glass doors one last time. He thought it was over. That she would vanish like the others. That her story would become another buried memory beneath Dominion's shiny success. But instead of hiding, Amaka had stepped into a role she never expected, a leader of a quiet rebellion. Zenith hired her within 48 hours. Her name alone brought them credibility. She wasn't just a strategist, she was a storm in heels. And she came prepared. She outlined a plan to target market sectors that Dominion had monopolized, promising not only to outperform them but to strip them of the very foundation they had abused for years. Zenith listened. They empowered her. And soon, Amaka's strategies began paying off. Contracts were won. Clients switched sides. Even some of Dominion's former senior staff jumped ship to work under her. She treated her people differently: fair pay, zero harassment tolerance, transparency in hiring. It wasn't just a new job, it was a revolution. But Amaka knew the real battle wasn't just about winning business, it was about exposing the truth behind Maxwell's empire. The plan was simple. Build the momentum. Collect evidence. And then strike where it hurt the most: public accountability. Amaka worked with a network of survivors from Dominion. Some anonymous, others ready to speak on camera. Their stories were horrifying, and painfully similar. But Amaka ensured they were protected legally and emotionally. Together with Zenith's legal and PR team, she curated a massive exposé. It included testimony, emails, screenshots, contracts signed under duress, surveillance footage, and even NDA documents that were later revealed to be coerced. The media was contacted. International watchdogs were alerted. And just as Maxwell was preparing to host an anniversary gala for Dominion's 15 years of excellence, the headlines dropped. The truth behind Dominion: how women were silenced for success. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. And at the center of it all stood Amaka, the woman who had once been escorted out like a criminal, now hailed as a hero. Amaka had never imagined herself as a movement. She just wanted to be respected. To work, to grow, to contribute. But the system she entered wasn't built to let women like her rise, not unless they bowed. Now, with every article published, with every voice that found the courage to speak, she realized that her story was much bigger than just her. It resonated with thousands, women in boardrooms, in banks, in schools, even in the market stalls. Maxwell had awakened something he couldn't control: a collective rage and a shared hope. As Dominion stock plummeted and its CEO trended for all the wrong reasons, Zenith rose as more than a company, It became a symbol, a place where people could thrive without fear. And Amaka? She became its heartbeat. Her alliance with Zenith wasn't just professional, it was personal. The CEO, Mr. Ifani Naji, had once faced similar corporate betrayal in his early career. He understood what it meant to be dismissed for standing up. That connection made their partnership unstoppable. He gave Amaka room to lead, and she repaid it with unmatched loyalty and excellence. As Zenith welcomed more ex-Dominion staff, policies were changed. Psychological counseling was offered. Legal support was made available to every woman willing to tell her story. The industry took notice. Rival companies scrambled to clean their image. HR departments were audited. A shift had begun, and it was shaking the entire system to its core. But Amaka remained grounded. For every applause she received, she remembered the faces of the women who couldn't speak, those still scared, those still healing. She continued to work quietly behind the scenes, organizing safe platforms for them, writing policy proposals to present to government agencies, and mentoring young women entering the workforce. Her days were long, her nights even longer, but she slept knowing she was finally fighting for something greater than herself. She hadn't set out to be a symbol, but now that she was one, she refused to be silent. The alliance between her and truth was now sealed. And Maxwell Briggs? He was about to learn that the greatest threat to a tyrant is not a sword, it's a woman with a story the world refuses to ignore. As the media storm gained momentum, Amaka found herself at the center of something larger than she could have ever imagined. Women from across the country, some she had never met, began sending her emails, private messages, and even handwritten letters. Most of them were former employees of Dominion Enterprises, while others worked for different companies but had suffered similar abuses in silence. They shared horrifying stories of being coerced into hotel meetings under the guise of performance reviews, of losing their jobs the moment they said no, and of being blackballed across the industry. Each message was painful. Some were filled with rage, others with sorrow, and a few were hesitant, only able to say, "Thank you for being brave when I couldn't." Amaka read every single one, some of them late into the night, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't just exposing Maxwell now, she was holding up a mirror to an entire system that had protected men like him for years. Zenith Dynamics, true to their word, set up a special task force within the company, a confidential department led by Amaka and 2 other senior executives trained in trauma and gender justice. Together they reviewed every testimonial, fact-checked names, and connected victims to a network of trusted legal advisors and therapists. Slowly, more women agreed to come forward publicly. Amaka ensured their identities were protected until they were ready. A few brave ones even offered to speak on camera, with voices modulated and faces blurred. These interviews, when compiled by an investigative journalist from an international outlet, formed the core of a documentary titled, The Silenced Women of Dominion. When it premiered online, it broke records. Within 48 hours, the documentary had over 10 million views, and hashtags like #DominionScandal and #AmakaSpeaks began trending across Nigeria and beyond. For the first time, it wasn't just Amaka's word against Maxwell's. It was dozens of women. Different backgrounds, different ranks, same story. The sheer consistency of their experiences made the public furious. Politicians began making statements. Influencers demanded corporate reform. Women from all sectors of society, bankers, teachers, doctors, market women, began speaking about workplace harassment, opening up a conversation that had long been buried in shame. Amaka had become more than a whistleblower. She had become a movement. But despite all this, she remained focused. She wasn't interested in fame or power. She wanted justice. She wanted accountability. And she wanted Maxwell Briggs to stand in a courtroom and answer for every tear, every career destroyed, every woman silenced under the weight of his wealth. Inside Dominion, chaos reigned. What was once a tightly controlled empire now teetered on the edge of collapse. Employees walked the halls with nervous eyes. Some feared their names would appear in the growing investigation. Others feared being fired as Maxwell became increasingly paranoid. His once loyal executives began resigning quietly, leaving behind cryptic LinkedIn posts about new beginnings. Shareholders demanded answers. International partners froze all contracts. Banks retracted funding. Yet, Maxwell still tried to maintain control, denying all allegations and painting himself as a victim of a vendetta. "This is a targeted attack on a successful black businessman," he said in a press release. But even the press wasn't buying it anymore. Dominion's media team couldn't keep up with the public backlash. Journalists who had once been bought with favors and ad placements now joined the chorus demanding justice. No amount of money could clean the blood off the floor anymore. Behind closed doors, Maxwell raged. He screamed at his staff, accusing them of betrayal. He fired his legal team and hired a new one. Aggressive, expensive, and with a history of defending criminals. They advised him to settle quietly. Offer Amaka money, apologize, and walk away with your assets, they said. But Maxwell refused. His ego couldn't accept defeat. He wasn't just fighting for his company now, he was fighting for his pride, his image. He believed even now that his money could still buy him out of this mess. That Amaka was just one woman and eventually the noise would die down. He didn't understand the depth of what she had started. He underestimated how tired women were of being silenced. He didn't realize that Dominion was just the first domino, and that the rest of the industry was now trembling under the same scrutiny. And then the final blow came. A former board member, one of Maxwell's oldest allies, flipped. He provided the anti-corruption agency with over 100 pages of documents, proof of hush money payments, forged reports, manipulated HR records, and blacklisted job applications. The evidence was damning. It tied Maxwell to everything. The agency, after months of pressure from the public and legal groundwork from Zenith's team, moved in. Dominion's headquarters was raided. Computers were seized. Accounts were frozen. Employees were questioned. Maxwell Briggs was no longer the CEO of Dominion. He was the target of a criminal investigation. And the world watched as the man who once ruled with unchecked power stood at the edge of a downfall that not even his billions could stop. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning. The kind of morning where the skies seemed to mirror the tension in the air. News vans had gathered outside Dominion's premises. Armed with warrants and backed by riot police, the anti-corruption agency marched into Maxwell's estate in Ikoyi with the kind of precision that only years of evidence could justify. He was in his home office, barking orders at his remaining staff when he heard the knock. Calm at first, then louder. When the doors burst open, Maxwell stood, still defiant, still convinced it was a bluff. "You have no right," he said, towering over the lead officer. The man handed him a warrant, unbothered. "Maxwell Briggs, you are under arrest for sexual assault, workplace harassment, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of corporate fraud." The words echoed through the mansion like thunder. His staff looked away. His personal assistant quietly began packing his things. No one stood up for him. Not anymore. The news spread like wildfire. Dominion CEO arrested, was plastered across every screen in Nigeria. Some celebrated. Some wept. Some stayed silent, shocked that it had finally happened. Amaka watched from her office, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't celebrating, there was too much pain behind this moment for that. But she allowed herself a quiet exhale. For every woman who had once cried alone in a restroom stall. For every girl told to keep quiet or lose her job. This was for them. Later that evening, Amaka received a call from one of the former victims. She didn't say much, just 4 words. "He's in handcuffs now." They both cried in silence. It wasn't over yet, but justice had finally shown its face. In the days that followed, Maxwell was arraigned. His legal team pushed for bail, citing his health, his contributions to the economy, and his reputation. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and testimonies, denied it. "This court cannot overlook the magnitude of the allegations or the risk of interference," the judge said. Maxwell was remanded to await trial. Cameras captured his stunned face as he was led away in handcuffs, no longer the predator but the prisoner. Dominion Enterprises crumbled. Lawsuits poured in. The board dissolved. And in its place rose a coalition of survivors, activists, and professionals who vowed never to let silence rule again. Amaka didn't attend every press conference. She didn't need to. Her work had spoken for itself. And even as she returned home to rest that evening, she knew the battle wasn't over. Because evil, when cornered, always finds a way to strike back. And Maxwell Briggs, even in a prison cell, was still plotting. The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed outside as news reporters tried to get a glimpse of the fallen mogul. Inside, silence hung heavy in the air. Maxwell Briggs entered in a tailored navy blue suit that couldn't hide the fatigue etched into his once proud face. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Amaka, who sat at the front row beside her legal team. She looked back at him, not with fear but with a calm resolve that unnerved him. This wasn't just a trial about one man. It was about decades of unchecked power, of pain silenced by fear and wealth. And the nation was watching. The judge, a woman known for her integrity, wasted no time. "This court is not here to protect the powerful," she said during opening remarks. "It is here to uphold the law." Those words set the tone. The prosecution came armed with mountains of evidence. Sworn affidavits, digital records, testimonies from over 20 former employees, and financial statements showing payouts to cover Maxwell's misconduct. They painted a picture of systematic abuse, of a man who used his influence to prey on vulnerable women, silence witnesses, and eliminate threats. Each testimony was a crack in the wall Maxwell had built around himself. There was Ngozi, the former executive assistant, who wept as she recalled being forced to choose between feeding her siblings or sleeping with the boss. There was Lara, who shared how her dream of becoming a project lead turned into a nightmare after a company retreat. Amaka herself testified on the third day. She walked to the witness stand with grace, her voice steady as she recounted her experience, from the first invitation to the threats, to the day she was escorted out. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke and the entire room listened. Maxwell's defense team tried to tear apart the testimonies. They claimed the women were seeking attention, that Amaka was bitter about being fired, that the so-called evidence was circumstantial. But the damage had already been done. Every denial sounded hollow. Every attempt to discredit Amaka only made her more credible. And as the days turned into weeks, the truth became undeniable. The judge adjourned the final verdict, stating it would be announced in 1 month. But even before the sentence was delivered, Maxwell was already a prisoner, not just in jail but in reputation. His businesses had been seized, his assets frozen, and his legacy destroyed. He was no longer the face of success. He was the face of shame. Yet through it all, Amaka stayed composed. She didn't gloat. She didn't boast. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only justice, delivered late but delivered all the same. The months that followed the trial were a whirlwind. Amaka became a national figure, though she never asked for the spotlight. Awards were given. Conferences invited her to speak. Magazines named her among the most influential women in Africa. But fame wasn't what she wanted. Her focus remained the same, healing and rebuilding. At Zenith, she launched the Women in Power Initiative, a mentorship and legal support program for women in male-dominated industries. The initiative partnered with top universities, law firms, and mental health experts. Within 3 months, it had helped over 300 women file workplace abuse reports, some of which resulted in the dismissal of predatory managers and systemic reforms in major firms. Amaka didn't lead with noise. She led with action. Her voice was calm, but her work was thunder. Yet even as she rose, she stayed grounded. She continued visiting rural schools on weekends, giving talks about self-worth and career empowerment. She made it a point to check in on the women who had testified during Maxwell's trial. She ensured they were receiving support, therapy, and opportunities to rebuild their careers. Amaka's life became a careful balance between corporate strategy and grassroots impact. And despite the praise, she still lived modestly. Her car was simple, her apartment quiet. "I don't want to become the kind of leader I fought against," she once told a journalist. Her humility became a beacon. Young women idolized her. Older women respected her. Even her critics were forced to admit, this woman was changing the game. Zenith Dynamics, under her influence, became the first Nigerian tech firm to achieve full gender parity in leadership positions. Internally, employee satisfaction reached an all-time high. Externally, clients admired the transparency and social responsibility the company displayed. Amaka had helped Zenith grow from a respected brand into a revolutionary force. But not everyone celebrated her rise. In the shadows, remnants of Maxwell's empire watched. Some investors who lost millions blamed her for their fall. Disgraced allies of Dominion grumbled about her influence. And Maxwell himself, sitting in his cell, consumed every article about her. He cut them out and pasted them on his wall. Not out of admiration but obsession. He didn't see a woman rising. He saw a target. And as he stared at her face in the glossy pages, he whispered one word, soon. Maxwell Briggs was released from prison exactly 1 year after his sentencing, on what his lawyers described as medical and behavioral grounds. The public outcry was immediate. Hashtags trended. Protesters gathered outside the prison gates. But legally nothing could be done. He had served the minimum required term, and due to overcrowding and good conduct, he was granted early release under strict parole conditions. A broken man on the outside, Maxwell played the part of the reformed soul. He gave a brief statement to the media saying, "Prison taught me a lot. I've made peace with my past and seek forgiveness." But behind closed doors he seethed with hatred. He blamed Amaka for everything, for his arrest, his disgrace, his losses. and he was determined to get his revenge. He began subtly. First, he created a fake social initiative under a new identity, the Redemption Project, claiming it aimed to help ex-convicts re-enter society. He used it to gain sympathy and slowly rebuild his image. He even managed to convince a few media outlets to give him airtime. On the surface, he played the role of a man seeking change. But beneath, he started tracking Amaka. He hired private detectives again, this time not to find dirt, but to find patterns. Where she lived, what time she left work, who she saw. He created fake profiles to interact with her online, trying to learn if she had security. When none of his efforts gave him the access he needed, he tried a different tactic. He messaged her directly. Amaka, I just want to talk. I'm a changed man. Please give me 10 minutes. Just 10. Amaka didn't respond immediately. Something in her gut screamed that this wasn't over. She showed the message to her team. Some advised ignoring him. Others suggested meeting with security. But Amaka, ever the strategist, decided to control the narrative. She agreed to meet, but not without taking precautions. She didn't tell Maxwell that she had copied the message to her lawyer and the police. She didn't tell him that she had shared her live location with 3 trusted friends. She didn't tell him that the coffee shop she suggested was under discreet surveillance. She simply replied, "Fine. One meeting. But only in public." Maxwell agreed, his eyes gleaming. He had no intention of meeting in public. His plan was already set, and this time he wasn't going to fail. Amaka stood in front of her mirror that evening, staring at her reflection with more focus than usual. She wasn't getting ready for a gala or a boardroom pitch. She was preparing for a meeting that her intuition told her could be fatal. She had agreed to Maxwell's request for a meeting not because she believed he had changed, but because she wanted to close the chapter herself. Still, something about the timing, the wording of his message, and his sudden appearance after a year of silence felt wrong. Her instincts, sharpened over years of survival, were flaring like sirens. She didn't ignore them. Before leaving, she did what every cautious woman in her position would do. She turned her phone's live location on and sent it to her closest friends with a note. "If I go silent for more than an hour, call the police." She even included a short voice note explaining Maxwell's message and where she was headed. She wore something practical: flat shoes for mobility, a light jacket to hide the recording device clipped to her blouse. She texted her lawyer and alerted Zenith's internal security team. But she told no one exactly what time she'd arrive. She didn't want Maxwell to get nervous if he saw anyone else nearby. On her way to the meeting point, a neutral cafe Maxwell had agreed to, Amaka couldn't stop thinking about everything she had been through. The countless women who had confided in her. The nights she cried herself to sleep but woke up the next day ready to fight. Maxwell wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of everything wrong with the corporate world. A monument of unchecked male ego and systemic corruption. And now that he was out of prison, her fear wasn't just that he would attack her, but that he would do so quietly, behind smiles and polished shoes, just like before. She arrived early, found a corner table facing the door and waited. Maxwell didn't show up. Instead, a text came in: "The place is too exposed. Come to the address below. It's safe. I just want to apologize properly." Amaka stared at the message, her heart beginning to pound. It was a private residence address. She knew then, this wasn't a conversation. This was a trap. She calmly forwarded the message and new location to her lawyer, her friends, and Zenith's security. Then, pretending to play along, she ordered tea, paid the bill, and left casually. The moment she exited the cafe, she slipped into a waiting car driven by Zenith's undercover security. "Follow the location," she said, her voice sharp. "But don't let him see us." The car pulled away, silent and fast. Amaka wasn't just attending a meeting now. She was walking into the lion's den, with cameras rolling. The house was secluded, nestled at the end of a quiet street in a high-end estate with few residents. Maxwell had chosen it well. It belonged to a former associate who owed him a favor and had no idea what he planned to do with the space. From the outside, it looked like any other luxury home. Clean walls, tinted glass, ornamental plants. But inside, darkness hovered. The curtains were drawn. The furniture had been cleared from the sitting room, save for one table and 2 chairs. On that table sat a bottle of water, a neatly folded napkin, and a small velvet box, intended as a gift of peace. But in Maxwell's back pocket was a concealed blade, short and sharp, the kind used for close, silent work. He paced like a lion waiting for its prey. The cameras were off. The house phone lines disconnected. His parole tracker had been deactivated by bribing a corrupt technician. He thought he had covered every base. He thought he had finally regained control. When Amaka arrived, she paused outside the gate, took a deep breath, and texted a single word to her lawyer, "Inside." She stepped in, her phone still recording. Maxwell greeted her with a smile, dressed like a changed man in neutral colors, sleeves rolled up. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair. "I just want to talk." Amaka nodded slowly and sat, her hands on her lap, her eyes never leaving his. "Talk then," she said, her voice calm. He began with a speech, how prison changed him, how he lost everything and had time to reflect. But beneath the surface of his words, Amaka saw it, the darkness in his eyes, the way his fingers twitched. Then he reached for the velvet box, slid it across the table. "Peace offering," he whispered. She didn't move. She said only one thing, "You planned this, didn't you?" And that was when his mask cracked. Maxwell's voice dropped. "You ruined me, Amaka. Everything I built. Everything I was. You took it." He stood slowly, pacing behind her. "And now you're going to pay." He reached into his pocket. But before he could draw the blade, a red laser dot appeared on his chest. "Don't move," a voice shouted from outside. Armed police swarmed the compound. Maxwell froze. Amaka remained seated, her face pale but unshaken. Her phone had not only been recording, it had also been streaming to a cloud server that Zenith's legal team accessed live. Within seconds, Maxwell was disarmed, handcuffed, and dragged outside. He screamed obscenities, his voice echoing through the once silent estate. Amaka finally stood, her knees trembling but firm. The officers surrounded her protectively. "We've got you, ma'am," one said gently. And only then did she let herself breathe. The aftermath of the rescue played out like a scene from a thriller. Social media exploded with the news. Maxwell Briggs attempts to kill Amaka. Police intervened just in time. Videos of the arrest circulated online within minutes. The justice system moved swiftly this time, perhaps out of guilt for ever letting Maxwell walk free. His parole was revoked. He was charged not only with attempted murder but also parole violation, tampering with tracking devices, and conspiracy to commit a felony. The court didn't waste time. He was denied bail and transferred to a maximum security facility. The judge's statement was brutal and final. "This man is a danger to society and a predator cloaked in privilege. He will face the full weight of the law." This time there was no expensive legal team to spin the story. No media outlets willing to paint him as a misunderstood genius. He was done. Amaka, though physically unscathed, was emotionally shaken. She had stared death in the face and refused to blink. But even courage had its cost. She spent the next week in seclusion, recovering under tight protection. She gave no statements to the press, declining every interview, every documentary offer. She needed space. Her friends stayed close. Zenith doubled her security. Her lawyer worked around the clock to ensure Maxwell would never be free again. When Amaka finally stepped out into the public eye again, it wasn't with a triumphant speech or a press conference. It was with a simple tweet, "I'm alive. I'm healing. And I'm grateful." The world replied with love, with support, with fury at the system that let it happen in the first place. And with every voice raised in solidarity, Amaka felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. That month, the Nigerian Senate passed the Corporate Safety and Harassment Accountability Bill, a law that had been languishing for years. Amaka's story had become more than a headline, it had sparked legal reform. Workplace surveillance rules were tightened. Whistleblower protections expanded. HR protocols transformed nationwide. It wasn't just a win for her. It was a win for every woman who had ever been made to choose between her dignity and her job. Amaka returned to Zenith to a standing ovation. But more importantly, she returned with a quiet, knowing smile. She had survived. She had fought. And she had won, not just the battle but the war. Yet in her heart, she knew the final chapter still remained. The one where the world would finally understand what it meant to be the one who said no. The sun was soft on her face as Amaka stepped onto the stage at the Women in Leadership Summit, held at the International Conference Center in Abuja. She wore a simple navy blue gown, her hair tied back, makeup minimal. The audience rose to their feet the moment they saw her. It wasn't just applause, it was reverence. Hundreds of women in the crowd held back tears. Some came from corporate Nigeria, others from schools, hospitals, markets, and homes where silence had ruled for far too long. Amaka stood before them not just as a keynote speaker, but as a living symbol of resistance, of truth, and of survival. When the hall finally quieted, she stepped up to the microphone. "I'm not here to tell you a story about pain," she began. I'm here to tell you a story about power, about what happens when we stop being afraid, when we stop bowing, when we say enough is enough. She didn't mention Maxwell by name. She didn't need to. His story had already been written, buried beneath the weight of justice. Instead, she spoke of systems, of women forced to smile through trauma, of careers ended in silence, of dreams suffocated by fear. She spoke about the culture of complicity, the HR managers who looked away, the executives who stayed quiet, the media who took bribes to kill stories. We always say it's the system, she said, her voice rising. But systems are built by people. And systems are changed by people too. Her words weren't dramatic. They were precise, surgical, and deeply human. She spoke of the pain, yes, but also of the strength. The small, brave acts of women who had dared to tell the truth. She thanked the survivors who came forward, those who testified, those who stood behind the scenes. You are the reason I'm alive, she said simply. As she stepped down from the stage, the applause returned, not loud and chaotic this time, but rhythmic, unified, like a drumbeat of victory. Amaka sat in the front row beside her closest allies. Her friends from Zenith, her legal team. A few of the women she helped pull out of the shadows. They held hands. They smiled. And for the first time in a long time, Amaka felt something complete. Maxwell Briggs would never see freedom again. His second trial had ended with a life sentence for attempted murder, and even his most loyal allies had turned their backs. Dominion Enterprises was no more. In its place stood a rising tide of ethical firms, led by women, protected by laws Amaka helped influence. And though she would forever carry the scars of what she had endured, she had transformed those wounds into weapons, that pain into purpose. She had proven that you don't need power to fight, you just need the courage to stand. And that was her legacy. Not just as the woman who exposed a predator. Not just as the strategist who rebuilt a company and shook an industry. But as the one who said no, and lived to tell the world why that no mattered. A no that echoed louder than a scream, firmer than a blow. A no that saved lives. A no that sparked a revolution. In the months that followed, her story was adapted into a global documentary, taught in universities, and studied in legal and HR reform workshops. But Amaka remained humble. She turned down TV shows, declined political appointments, and refused to write a tell-all memoir. Instead, she continued her work quietly, advocating for victims, helping build safer workplaces, mentoring girls in public schools. Because she didn't need the world to remember her name. It was enough that they remembered her stand, that they remembered what it cost, and that they remembered that sometimes, the most powerful word in the world, is no. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tales by Tochi for more.